Oh, let's start here. So let's start with my presentation of English Literature 2. My name is Thereza, and for this presentation, we were supposed to talk about two works of Charles Dickens and a third one, and we would choose between Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde or Dorian, Dorian Gray. And the two Charles Dickens works I chose was first David Copperfield, A Christmas, and the second, A Christmas Carol. And I chose my third one, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, from by Robert Louis Stevenson. So let's start. First, I want to talk a little bit about Charles Dickens because he was one of the most important novelists of all time, and he is part of more than half than my presentation. So Charles Dickens, his full name was Charles John Huffam Dickens. He was born in February 7th in 1812 in Portsmouth, England, and he died June 9th in 1870 in Higham, Kent, still in England. And he is, is really important to analyze because he's considered one of the greatest novelists of Victorian era. And his works remains influential and widely read to this day. And as I presented in Oliver Twist, we can see he is still influential until nowadays, but sometimes we don't notice. So his main works are Oliver Twist, David Copperfield, Christmas Carol, and Little Dorrit. I put this here because uh, one characteristic of Charles Dickens is he put a lot of his personal life in his works. Some things that happened, many things actually that happened in Oliver Twist, like he had to work really early, was something that happened with Charles Dickens. And the same thing happened in David Copperfield. David Copperfield is actually almost biography, an autobiography of Charles Dickens because he puts many things of himself in David Copperfield. And in David Copperfield and in Little Dorrit, it has something that happened with his father that he had many debts and was sent to a jail. He was locked away because of his debts. It's something that really happens in his personal life that he put in his works. And he's not just a writer to write stories and for people to have fun, but he writes his works with themes to criticize the society and to change something. He was a really famous writer, and his works. Como é que é? Eu vou aqui do lado. Não dá não. Enfim, his works were really important for Victorian society because it changed it changed a lot of characteristics of Victorian era, mainly in A Christmas Carol. That work changed the way people celebrate Christmas. It's something huge. It's worldwide. So his main themes, I guess, is the the most present is the poverty. He criticized a lot because he saw many poverty in England. He was really poor, and he also criticizes child exploitation, social inequality in Victorian England, the inefficient system, and the industrialization. He criticized a lot all these things that made Victorian era in London worst, mainly for the poverty people. Sorry. So let's move on. I wrote here some fun facts about him that I found, and the first one was Dickens walked up 20 kilometers a day through the streets of London, observing the people and places he used in his books. So, as I said, he put the truth, the reality, in his works. Another point that I found was he was obsessed with punctuality and organization, including in his writing. And during his public lectures, he gave dramatic readings of his works, portraying the characters with great intensity. So he was not just a writer, he put himself as a reader to his public, but he wasn't just reading a book, a common person reading a book. He gave a life to be uh, one of all of his characters. He acts. He was like an actor. Um, not just reading, he was giving the characters to life. And he opposed slavery and broke off relations with American publishers because of it. So we can see that all of his life he was engaged man. He was a person with a strong position in the society. He was really engaged. Let's move on to David Copperfield. And David Copperfield is Charles Dickens' favorite son. I wrote he because one version of a book, David Copperfield, has a preface, and in which the author, Dickens, says that he loves all his children, which is the novels. He loves all the novels, all his children, and like any loving father, he has a favorite son, and his favorite son is David Copperfield. And David Copperfield, it was initially written as a serial because he published weekly. It was a chapter was published every week on a newspaper. So that's why I put here 1849 and 1850 because it was just one chapter published among many weeks. This book is really huge. And this was, and the author, Dickens, have to develop, needs to develop some strategies to keep the audience faithful to the reading. So this is why he ensured that every chapter had a hook for the next chapter. He had like a bridge for the first to the second to the third, and on and on and on. Because it's um it's a strategy to keep people's attention, to not to stop reading David Copperfield. And it's a memory book because it's a first person book, and actually we cannot trust the credibility of this book because it's a first person. We have just one point of view, and it's David Copperfield um, point of view because he's the narrator. And if you have just one point of view, it's just one perspective. So maybe he changed the story for his favor. But the narrator, David, presents the story as if it was a diary. So he he's telling with himself. He says that he had no intention to publish him. So he by this way he restores all the credibility of the facts because he would have no reason to lie or to change facts in this way. As a writing just him for him. He wasn't supposed to publish it. So who was going to read? Who was he going to enganar? So the narrative is told from the point of view of the protagonist. As I say, is a memory book and is also a strategy to instigate the reading and and talking about the facts, and there is a memory book because everything he's telling are things that have already happened, right? And he knows that happens. He's just telling his story that we know. No, we don't know. He knows that happens because he's speaking about his life. And at several points, the narrator gives hints of what will happen in the future in the other chapters so that he has the reader's attention and the reader's curiosity as well, right? Because of the hints he gave. So about the chapters, we have the protagonist, David Copperfield, which is the narrator and the protagonist. He is an orphan. Actually, he became orphan before he was born. His dad died, and after some years, his mother died as well. So he became an orphan so young. And he suffers a lot under his stepfather control, which is this man here, Edward Murdstone. But he is still showing up as an honest, sensitive, sometimes a naive boy. But we have Peggotty. Peggotty is one of the main characters because she is his maternal figure. He had no affection by his stepfather, his father because he died, his mother because she was influenced by his stepfather. So this affection part he saw in Peggotty. That's why she is his maternal figure. and she's a kind, loving, and faithful person. But Edward Murdstone is, as I said, David's stepfather. He mistreats David a lot. He's a cruel man, he's harsh and controlling. And he sent David to work with, I think, 10 years old in a factory. Other characters we have uh, James Steerforth is not one of the main characters, but is a friend that David made at his school, so he's his schoolmate. But he is selfish and irresponsible. Because of him, his family suffered a lot, and he's not seen as a really good person. And Uriah Heep is like one of the villains. I think Uriah Heep and David Copperfield's stepfather are the villains here. And he is hypocritical and traitorous manipulator. He feigns, he feigns humility to climb the social ladder and deceive Mr. Wakefield. So at first, he was seen as a good person, but we developed the story and we notice he's not. We also have Wilkins McCober. He is an optimistic person. He always thinks he is going to earn in the lottery or no. He always thinks about a business ideas that he has to earn money, but he's indebted. He has several bills, but he's still hopeful that in optimist that this is gonna change and he looks forward. We also have Aunt Betsy Trotwood, and she's David's aunt. She's the sister of his mother, and she is eccentric, but she's not that weird. She's just a little bit eccentric, but she is a really strong woman and determined. And she is the one who welcomes and becomes David's guardian. David's go after her, and when they found, she takes care of him. And Dora Spano, I just put the main. Um, Dora was David's first wife. So as you can see here, um, we nós acompanhamos David's story from the childhood until he got married. And it's David's first wife, but she doesn't get along with household chores. And David is working, is busy, and get home like tired. And she says she doesn't know how to cook, to do stuff, or to clean the house. So they two face difficulties in an immature marriage. So some analysis. First off, the criticism of child cruelty and domestic abuse. And as I said, we are going to see in the analysis these critics Dickens put in his works. So this first one is David's childhood is marked by physical and psychological punishment, deprivation of affection, and religious indoctrination. Dickens exposes the vulnerability of children in a system where there is no effective legal protection against such abuse, and how cruelty can traumatically shape an individual's life. And another point is social injustice and poverty. So social injustice and devastating effects of poverty. David's experience at the factory is a shocking reflection of child labor conditions and the exploitation of cheap labor. It highlights the struggles of characters like the Micawbers, whose life are constant battle against debt and debtors' imprisonment, illustrating the financial fragility and the lack of opportunities for many. We have many analyses here. We have more after. And we also have the bureaucracy and the ineffectiveness of the legal system. And first, it's an ineffective bureaucracy in the slow legal system. The Micawber saga, with their debts and the constant threat of debtors' prison, as well as the confusion surrounding David's inheritance, reveal the complexity and corruption that could afflict ordinary individuals, mainly the poorest part of society. And we also have the hypocrisy and self-morality, as we see in Hyde. It exposes the hypocrisy and false morality present in Victorian society, and characters like Hyde, with his forced humility and sneaky ambition, represent the deception and deceit hidden behind a facade. And the way society judges, condemns those condemns those who deviate from established norms, like Emily, is also a point of criticism. Emily I didn't put here because I didn't thought he was important. So she was the one David liked the most, than his first wife, and they ended together. So the next work is going to be A Christmas Carol that I really enjoyed. It's from 1843. So A Christmas Carol. Let's go. First, it's some part of the story. We have Ebenezer Scrooge, a miserly old man who despises Christmas and kindness. In his visit by three ghosts, the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and yet to come, who guide him through visions of his life, family, and future. And Scrooge, we have this whole thing is because of Scrooge's transformation at the end. And after the visions, Scrooge repents of his greed and becomes a generous and caring man, embracing the spirit of Christmas. And as a Dickens work, we have the themes that are the story addresses themes of redemption, compassion, social critique, of inequality, and in the importance of generosity and family unity. So let's go to the characters. First, we have Ebenezer Scrooge, and he's the protagonist. At the beginning of the story, Ebenezer Scrooge is the embodiment of miserliness, selfishness, and arrogance. He's a bitter, cold, and isolated man who despises joy, generosity, and especially Christmas. He values money above all else, seeing it as the only source of security and power. Scrooge is estranged from his family, disdainful of his employees, and insensitive to the plight of the poor. So he's a very important character, first because he's the protagonist and the moral of no, he is the moral center of the narrative, and the entire stories involve around his transformation, and he represents the kind of individual Dickens criticizes as like someone who has lost their humanity in the pursuit of profit, forgetting compassion and connection with others. And his journey of redemption, driving by ghosts visits, is the heart of the book. And he serves as a mirror reflecting what society can become without empathy. We can become Ebenezer Scrooge. Jacob Marley. Jacob Marley was Scrooge's deceased business partner 7 years before the story begins. In life, he was as greedy and insensitive as Scrooge, if not more so. His ghost appears bound by heavy chains, first from money boxes, ledgers, and padlocks, symbols of his life of accumulation and indifference. He is condemned to wander the earth, witnessing the misery he can no longer alleviate, a torment for his past lack of charity. And Jacob Marley is an important uh, person because he's the first catalyst of Scrooge's transformation. His appearance serves as a terrifying warning and a call to action. Has to act. And he not only confirms the existence of the spiritual world, but also explains to Scrooge the consequences of a life lived without compassion. And the sign of Marley, suffering eternally for his past greed, is the initial shock that shakes Scrooge's rigid beliefs and prepares him to the visit of the other three spirits. And he is the messenger of damnation and the possibility of redemption. Ei, bom dia. A gente pegava mais dois coletinhos. Não sei da aula, não. Ei, pode voltar para lavar? Não, a gente tá separando para lavar a cena assim antes. Ah, é? Uhum. Eu não boto amaciante. Não? Não, não posso não botar nesse daqui. Tá bom. So another important character is Bobby Cratchit. Bobby is Scrooge, this man here, is Scrooge's underpaid and overworked clerk, and despite his poverty and the miserable working conditions, Bob is a kind-hearted, devoted family man, gentle and optimistic. He endures Scrooge's hardships with remarkable patience and still maintains a genuine Christmas spirit. So he's one of the opposite sides of Scrooge. And Bob, he represents the poor working class of Victorian London who, despite economic hardship, maintain their dignity and family values. Through him and his family, Dickens humanizes the poor whom Scrooge so despises, and the Cratchits, his family, lives offer a vivid contrast to Scrooge's solitude, and showing that true wealth lies in love and family unity, no money. And the plight of Bob and Tim is what truly touches Scrooge's hearts. But who is Tim that touches Scrooge's hearts? Tim Cratchit is Bobby Cratchit's youngest son, and he's a crippled and frail child who uses a crutch. And despite his physical fragility and his family's struggles, Tim is the embodiment of innocence, faith, and unwavering optimism. His phrase, God bless us, everyone, and encapsulates his goodness and gratitude for life. So, Tim is the emotion key to Scrooge redemption and his fragile condition and the prediction of his impending death without uh, Scrooge's intervention, he was going to die. And this whole thing serves as a vivid reminder of consequences and of indifference and a lack of charity. And Tim's vulnerability and pure spirit awakens Scrooge's compassion like no other elements. He represents hope and the fragility of life, becoming the symbol of what Scrooge can save through his actions. Fred's an important part because he's part of Scrooge's family. Fred is Scrooge's nephew. The Fred is Scrooge's cheerful, persistent, and optimistic nephew, the son of his beloved sister, Pen. And despite his uncle's constant rejections and rudeness, Fred never gives up inviting him to Christmas dinner. And he is the antithesis of Scrooge, exemplifying generosity, the Christmas spirit, and humor warmth. So Fred serves as a constant counterpoint to Scrooge's misanthropy. His insistence of including his uncle, even knowing his nature, demonstrates the strength of family love and the capacity for forgiveness. He shows Scrooge and the reader that the joy of Christmas is not in wealth, but in togetherness and the celebration of life. Fred is living proof that happiness can exist without accumulation of material possessions, serving as a beacon of warmth against Scrooge's coldness. So now let's go to the nicest part of the story. The 3 Christmas ghost visits. Let's go first. Was the visit of Ghost of Christmas Past, and now it's a she, but sometimes it's he, I don't know. It's an ethereal and luminous figure with features that blend childhood and old age. It has a light emanating from his head and a cap to extinguishing it. It is serene, mysterious, and direct, showing Scrooge's visions of his own story. So this ghost is crucial for awakening memory and remorse in Scrooge. It forces him to confront his moment of innocence, his capacity for love, and the turning points where he chose greed. It reveals to Scrooge the cause of his current misery which lies in his past choices. By revisiting his lonely childhood and the abandonment of his love, Scrooge begins to feel pity for himself and opens up to change. So now he's thinking about change. And then we have the Ghost of Christmas Present, this big man here. He is seen as a gigantic, jovial, and majestic figure, crowned with a holy and carrying a torch sharpened like a horn of plenty, and it exudes joy, abundance, and generosity. It appears surrounded by an aura of warmth and light, and by its side reveals the figures of ignorance. So this ghost brings Scrooge into the here now, showing him how people celebrate Christmas regardless of their wealth. And it reveals to Scrooge the consequences of his indifference in the present, especially through the Cratchit family and the Tiny Tim's illness, and the observation of poverty and joy coexisting, and the revelation of allegories of ignorance force Scrooge to reflect on his social responsibility and the impact of his actions on others. So the last but not least ghost is the ghost of Christmas yet to come, or Ghost of Christmas Future. And it is the darkest and most terrifying of the three. It is a silent and hooded figure resembling death itself. It looks like death. It does not speak, but merely points with a skeletal finger, communicating through gestures. Its presence is menacing and solemn. So this ghost here is important because it is the catalyst for Scrooge's transformation. It shows Scrooge the inevitable future if he does not change his own solitary and unmourned death, the Cratchit family's sorrow over the loss of Tiny Tim, and the indifference of everyone around him. This ghost instills fear and despair in Scrooge, but it is precisely this fear of condemnation that drives him to beg for a chance to alter his destiny. It's his destiny. And it represents the last chance for redemption, showing what it is at stake. So these whole characters with their distinct characteristics and intertwined roles build a powerful narrative about the importance of empathy, generosity, and redemption, making A Christmas Carol a timeless and universal work. So let's go to the analysis. We have a lot of analysis here. The first, Dickens criticizes Victorian society and human nature. It's obvious, yeah? So, all the hypocrisy of excessive wealth, social indifference, and exploitation of the poor. It's the main point he observes. And also, Ebenezer Scrooge's journey of redemption is shown us as the importance of compassion, character, and personal transformation. And Dickens hoped the work would encourage the wealthy to recognize the plight of the less fortunate and act with greater empathy. but I think it just happens sometimes at Christmas. So, some points here. First, the importance of redemption and hope. And Scrooge's transformation led by Ghost demonstrates that it is never too late to change, recognize one's mistakes, and seek a path of compassion and solidarity. Dickens believes that literature has the power to influence and transform human relationships. He also critiques of social indifference and poverty. The most prominent theme is the critique of indifference and lack of empathy toward the poor and disadvantaged. Dickens was a keen observer of the social conditions of Victorian England, marked by extreme inequality. Scrooge, in his blindness and selfishness, echoes the thinking of many at the time who viewed poverty as a moral failing or a problem to be solved with debtors' prisons and workhouses, rather than compassion and charity. Another point is the consequence of ignorance and poverty. Yes, poverty has consequences. At the end of the Ghost of Christmas Presents visit, the allegorical figures of ignorance and poverty emerge from the roads. And the ghost warns Scrooge to beware of them, especially ignorance, on whose forehead is damnation written, and indicating that lack of knowledge and extreme deprivation are direct threats to society. And another point is the social dangers arising from neglect of education and the persistence of poverty. So society's complacency regarding ignorance and poverty, which breed violence, crime, and social collapse. Dickens calls for attention to these issues as a moral and a social imperatives. So we have some adaptations also, mainly to movies. I think is the Disney adaptation is the most famous one. Is It's Loving. I really enjoy it. But we have a bunch of more adaptations, as I found is this site here. It's just for a Christmas Carol adaptation. Look, it's a really big site. The Odd Couple, Family Ties, Screwed. Screwed became a verb here. Saved by the Bell. The Muppets Christmas Carol. Look, it was adapted to many. Look at this, how big this site is. To many different works. So I won't show the others. And that's why we can see that it was still present nowadays and it's still important to talk about Charles Dickens. So the last but not least, that it shows was strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Let's go. First off, I will talk about the main characters, there are three, and the first is Dr. Henry Jekyll, a respected and well-reputed doctor and scientist in London. He's a good, charitable man who secretly feels frustrated by the need to suppress his darker desires. to maintain his social image. Seeking a way to separate the inherent good and evil within humans, he develops a potion that transforms him into his alter ego. We also have Gabriel John Utterson, and he's a London lawyer and a close friend of Dr. Jekyll. He is the story primary narrator and serves as the voice of reason and curiosity. Utterson becomes intrigued and concerned by Jekyll's strange behavior and Hyde's appearance, dedicating himself to unrevealing the mystery behind their relationship. We also have Mr. Edward Hyde, and it's Dr. Jekyll's monstrous and cruel alter ego. Hyde is the embodiment of Jekyll's most depraved and violent impulses, free from any moral or social inhibition. Inhibition. His appearance is described as repulsive and unsettling, and he commits acts of pure evil, including murder, without remorse. The name Hyde suggests the hidden and repressed nature he represents. So the plot. This book was published in 1886, still in Victorian era, and Robert Louis Stevenson tells the story of Gabriel John Utterson, a London lawyer deeply troubled by the strange connection between his respected friend, Dr. Henry Jekyll, and a sinister and violent man named Edward Hyde. The mystery begins when Utterson discovers that Jekyll has made Hyde the sole beneficiary of his will, a fact that deeply disturbs him. As he investigates, Utterson hears disturbing accounts of Hyde's cruel and repulsive behavior, including a brutal incident in which Hyde runs over a young woman. The mystery deepens when Sir Danvers Carroll, a prominent member of Parliament and Utterson's client, is brutally murdered. Evidence points to Hyde as the killer, and a broken cane found at the crime scene is identified as the one Utterson had given to Jekyll. Jekyll appears shaken and claims to have severed ties with Hyde. Ultimately, Jekyll withdraws into himself, refusing to receive visitors. Utterson and Jekyll's butler, Paul, become increasingly concerned and eventually break into Jekyll's laboratory, and they find Hyde's body dressed in Jekyll's clothes, along with two letters, one from Dr. Lanyon, another friend of Jekyll's, and one from Jekyll himself. Lanyon's letter reveals a shocking truth. He witnessed Hyde transform back into Jekyll after drinking a potion, a sight that caused Lanyon to fall ill and die from the shock. Jekyll's own letter provides the full and horrifying confession. He explains that He was a man of dual nature, constantly struggling between his respectable public persona and his hidden dark desires. To separate these two sides, he developed a serum that would allow him to transform into a completely different being, Edward Hyde. Initially, Jekyll reveled in the freedom Hyde offered, indulging in vices without fear or repercussions of his own reputation. However, Hyde's evil nature grew stronger and more dominant, and Jekyll found himself losing control. The transformation became involuntary, occurring even without the serum. Hyde's actions culminating in the murder of Sir Danvers Carroll became increasingly monstrous. Jekyll's letter ends with his desperate realization that he is losing the battle and will soon be permanently trapped as Hyde. The story includes with the implication that Jekyll, like Hyde, took his own life to prevent further atrocities, leaving behind the chilling story of his failed experiment and the inherent, inherent, inherent duality of human nature. I put here some analysis and not some before some analysis. I put some curiosities, and it's because how um, the strange case of the third Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is still influential. First, in the cinema, this story has been adapted for film several times, demonstrating the power of its characters and the narrative's ability to transcend the work itself. And also the psychologically and psychoanalysis, because the work is often used as an example to illustrate concepts such as the repression of instincts, the duality of personality, and the influence of the inconscience of human behavior. And also popular cultures. Fun fact, the expression Jekyll and Hyde has become a common term to describe people with opposing personalities who alternate between distinct behavior. And last, suspense in horror literature. As a Gothic novel, the story is a classic of the genre, and the figure of Mr. Hyde, with his violence and evil, has become an archetype of the villain. In the analysis, the first thing we can see is the duality of human natures. I think that's the most obvious point here. And this is undoubtedly the most central and striking critic of the work. Stevenson explores the idea that every human being possesses a dual nature, a good, civilized side and a dark, primitive side. Dr. Jekyll tries to separate these two sides, believing he can isolate evil to live a life of virtue. However, what he discovers is that evil, once unleashed and nurtured as with Hyde, becomes increasingly and stronger and more dominant, proving that it is inseparable from good and unchecked can consume the person completely. And also I think it's important to say that always critiquing the hypocrisy of Victorian society, not just the Victorian, the whole society. The book is a powerful critique of the hypocrisy and appearances of the Victorian era. 19th century London was extremely rigid society that valued reputation, public morality, and respectability above all else. And Dr. Jekyll is the epitome of this respectability, but he hides sinful desires and imposes that society would not accept. Hyde becomes the outlet for these repressed desires, allowing Jekyll to explore his vices without tarnishing his public image. The criticism here is that rather than confronting and integrating his darker sides, Victorian society encouraged suppression and disguise, which could lead to monstrous consequences, such as the release of an uncontrollable habit. And the last analysis I put is the dangers of unethical science and boundary transgression. Because Dr. Jekyll is a brilliant scientist, but his quest for knowledge and control over human nature leads him to experiment beyond dangerous and unethical boundaries. He seeks to manipulate the sense of the human soul, something that was considered God's province at the time. And Stevenson suggests that science, when devoid of moral and ethical considerations, can have catastrophic results. And Jekyll's experiment not only destroys himself, but also causes suffering and death to others, demonstrating the dangers of playing God. And the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde's timeless work that invites us to reflect on the complexity of human nature, the dangers of repression and social hypocrisy, and the ethical implications of the unbridled pursuit of knowledge. The story forces us to confront the idea that the monster is not only outside us, but resides within each of us, waiting for an opportunity to manifest itself. And a fun fact, actually, it inspired this really famous film, Fight Club from 1999. It's an action movie. It's about this small man. It's his delusions with the corporate world. A man makes a mysterious friend and creates a secret club, the perfect place to deal with pent-up feelings. So he found this friend and they got into this fight club to express. But there was no friend. It was just him, his alter ego. And actually, I just watched 10, 10, 2 minutes of this um, movie, and I realized it's so obvious. It's it's on your face what is going to happen. It's so obvious. But as I was reading Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, I couldn't notice what was going to happen. It was a little scary. So that was my presentation. Thank you so much. And see ya. The next, no, your screen is, I don't know how I can stop. Let me see, I think it's here. Ah, it's here. Bye-bye.